When the Chicago Bulls decided to make a blockbuster trade, arguably one of the biggest trades in over a decade, for then All-Star Nikola Vucevic in exchange for Wendell Carter Jr., Otto Porter, and 2 first-round picks in 2021 and 2023, they made a decision at that time to accelerate their current rebuild, to bring in win-now talent to pair alongside budding All-Star and Zach LaVine, to put an end to what the previous regime had put in place and start building a competitive team and contending team in the Eastern Conference. This, of course, led to further changes in the offseason, with the Bulls executing sign-and trades for both DeMar DeRozan and Lonzo Ball, as well as signing Alex Caruso. The goal in all of this, ending a perpetual state of rebuilding and looking to win now, which worked for a short period of time. When Lonzo Ball was healthy, the offense was flying around all over the place, the Bulls were quick moving in transition, the ball movement was there, it was a thing of beauty, the perimeter defense was top notch, and it looked like the Bulls really had something here, until they didn't. Now obviously the injury to Lonzo Ball was a huge wrench in this in terms of the Bulls' overall ability to remain competitive, but even the Lonzo injury aside, it's been made pretty clear that this team isn't going to work. We all know this. We've been talking about it for nearly 2 years now. But while most people are of the belief that where the Bulls made their biggest mistake was executing the trade for Nikola Vucevic and effectively mortgaging their future, there was actually a bigger mistake they made that truly set this franchise back into where they are today, and it's what we'll be talking about in this video. So sometimes I've been asked, what's the biggest mistake this front office has made that has led to where we are today in the current state of this Bulls team? And while you really can't point to one single mistake that has cost them in their future, it is, of my opinion anyway, that what cost them the most in terms of setting this franchise back was prioritizing building around Zach LaVine and doing everything that they could to keep him happy and keep him around. Because here's the thing, we all know Zach LaVine at that time was a talented player. We all knew he was an all-star caliber player. We knew he was a valuable piece to the organization going into the 2020-21 season when the new front office took over. But at the same time, we also knew there were a lot of flaws with Zach. Not a good defender, poor decision maker, low basketball IQ at times, not really the best leader, and I know we've said it so many times, but also questionable as to whether Zach LaVine could be a #1 option on a contending team. Now at that time, again, it was around the time when I started the channel, I was super critical of Zach LaVine, and I got a lot of heat for it from viewers because people wanted to believe that yes, Zach LaVine is that guy. He is a #1 option on a contending team that you most certainly build around, because players of his talent and skill level don't grow on trees. And while I recognize the skill, while I recognized how great of a player he was and still is, I just wasn't seeing it as him being the player you move mountains for to build your team around. I just wasn't seeing it. Yes, he was only 25, 26 at the time. Yeah, at that point he was getting better with every season, but we also kind of knew who Zach was. And I really didn't see this ceiling that everyone else was so high on. Now, this isn't my way of saying I told you also, even though I know it's coming out that way, but more so explaining why the front office and their decision to build around Zach is as what led to the downfall of what you see today. Because as much as you can say the Bulls lost the Vucevic trade, how terrible it was, which absolutely is the case, the Bulls shouldn't have found themselves in a position where they were trying to accelerate their timeline and looking to win now with the impetus of building around Zach LaVine. Because look, the Bulls knew, as they were currently constructed going into the trade deadline in 2021, Zach LaVine was eventually going to get fed up and could leave as a free agent the following offseason if they didn't make massive changes. They traded for Vucevic to show Zach that, hey, they meant business. Because even though the trade sounds terrible now, at that time, Vucevic was an all-star, putting up 24 and 12 a game on 40% shooting from 3 on high volume. He was a prized commodity who still had 2 years left on his deal at that time. And to get an all-star of his caliber in that trade market, 2 first-round picks was standard. And yes, Wendell Carter Jr. was included, a young prospect, but let's be real here. Most Bulls fans didn't even really like Wendell and didn't really see him being anything special. And he continues to be a player that can never stay healthy and too soft when he's on the court. So yes, the trade at that time and the amount they gave up to get him made sense. Obviously, it backfired on the Bulls because Vucevic wasn't as dominant as they thought he would be in terms of his playing days in Orlando, and the Bulls, because they screwed up and failed to make the playoffs, had to turn those 2 picks into 2 lottery picks. But be all that as it may, trading for Vucevic was for Zach LaVine. That's why they did it. They felt that they had to act quick, they felt that they had to act now, and then they escalated that even further by making all the moves they did in the summer of 2021. Now again, some of these decisions in and of itself were not smart, and they got worse over time when it was clear this group had a lot of flaws and they basically stood around and twiddled their thumbs at every subsequent trade deadline and free agency period. But the genesis of all this was making Zach LaVine happy. building around him, and then signing him to a max deal. Now, we've talked about whether the Bulls should have in fact signed Zach to a max. Was he worth it? And while I still maintain giving him that max was better than letting him walk for nothing, and that they were really put into a situation where they had to give him the max because of being in a bird rights trap and also not putting themselves in a position where they gave him a lower offer and that impacting their relationship with Zach LaVine and having that impact his play on the court, since we all know Zach takes these kind of things personally, the front office trapped themselves into a situation believing that Zach LaVine is who they should be building around, letting everybody else go, like Lauri Markkanen, Wendell Carter Jr., foregoing future picks to make Zach happy. When in reality, they should have probably looked to trade Zach LaVine going into that 2021 trade deadline when his value was at its peak, being selected to an All-Star for the first time, putting up near 40, 50, 90 splits, having his best and most productive season, and then getting a massive haul and taking that haul to further build upon before Zach LaVine was getting close to free agency. Now, people would have thought the Bulls were crazy to pull something like that off at that time, to let your best player, your star player go, but it was also crazy to delude yourselves into thinking that Zach LaVine was going to be some superstar in this league, that was going to change this franchise and their future. And we're seeing that play out now. Like, as good as Zach has been and still is as a player, it's been undeniable that he lacks the leadership skills, the IQ and decision making to really be a true star in this league. The lack of accountability, the poor attitude at times, the body language on the court has been anything short of disappointing. And while I get there, yes, is an element of frustration on the part for Zach LaVine, tired of being in a losing situation, not happy with how the front office has constructed this roster around him, constantly being in trade rumors for the better part of 2 years, none of that is going to sit well with a player. So part of me doesn't blame Zach LaVine for being upset, for ultimately requesting to be traded, which we now find ourselves in, and also being upset with the front office and ownership for not correcting and fixing the issues that came after the fact once he signed his max deal. But at the same time, you know what also should be done if you're unhappy with losing and how the team has been struggling to fit together? Maybe play a little better, making adjustments to your game to fit the overall flow and offensive system, maybe playing better defense, maybe stop complaining to the refs at critical moments in a game and getting back on the other end. Hustle and actually look like you give a damn when you're out there on the floor. Like, there's also a level of accountability on the part of Zach LaVine, and we just haven't seen that for a good portion of his tenure with the Chicago Bulls. And I know the way that I'm coming at Zach now is a little harsh, and to be honest, part of it is a level of bitterness because of how his time with the Bulls is ending. I know that it's going to be getting a little ugly with Bulls fans, and we're all kind of reacting to the heat of the moment here, but honestly, for the front office, as guys who were paid lots of money to have these roles, they should have seen something like this coming. And it's why their decision, more than anything else, to build around Zach LaVine and doing what they could to keep him happy was the biggest mistake to date. I know a lot of people aren't going to agree with that though, so let me know in the comments how you feel about it. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.